Welcome back. More congressional Republicans are coming out in support of Donald Trump's presidential campaign, even those who were against his candidacy back during the 2016 race. Ahead of the Iowa caucuses, Senator Marco Rubio of Florida and Senator Mike Lee of Utah both endorsed the former president, with Rubio arguing, quote, "It's time to get on with the work of beating Biden and save America." Lee urged his voters to cast their ballots for Trump regardless of whether they agree with everything he says or not. But interestingly, both were singing a decidedly different tune back in 2016. Take a listen.
If anyone spoke to my wife or my daughter or my mother or any of my 5 sisters the way Mr. Trump has spoken to women, I wouldn't hire that person. I wouldn't hire that person, wouldn't want to be associated with that person. And I certainly don't think I'd feel comfortable hiring that person to be the leader of the free world.
Donald Trump has been perhaps the most vulgar, no, I don't think perhaps, the most vulgar person to ever aspire to the presidency in terms of how he's carried out his candidacy.
There is no way we are going to allow a con artist to take over the conservative movement, and Donald Trump is a con artist.
He doesn't sweat. He doesn't sweat because his pores are clogged from the spray tan that he uses. Donald is not going to make America great. He's going to make America orange.
How things have changed. Joining us now, communications strategist and former aide to House Speakers Ryan and Boehner, Brandon Buck. He is an MSNBC political analyst. Brandon, good to see you. I mean, it's not even a surprise. Republicans come running back to Trump, those who once were critical of him. So very few have stayed steadfast in opposing him. But, you know, congressional endorsements sometimes matter, and a whole bunch of them have come out for Trump in recent days, including these two who once opposed him. What do you make of these, the timing of these endorsements? What kind of message does it send? But really, what does it tell us about the party?
Yeah, a few things. I mean, I don't think congressional endorsements themselves matter that much. What they tell you, though, is that these are politicians who do polls in their states or their districts, and they see what I think all of us are seeing, that this is Donald Trump's party still, and there's no real use in fighting it. I mean, we've had a primary here where Ron DeSantis, I think, wanted to move us past Trump and give you a lot of what Trump is, maybe a little less crazy, a little more boring, and voters don't want that. And you got Nikki Haley, who maybe wants to go back to a party that we had 10, 15 years ago. Voters don't want that. And that's what these senators and House members are seeing, that this is where the party is, firmly still a Trump party. Doing it at this late date, I think, basically tells us what we're going to find out tonight, that this primary is over. It was probably over before it began. There's not a real competitive primary here. They understand that Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis had their shot. It's not going to work out. And so they're trying to get ahead of that.
Yeah, and let's spend a moment on that idea that, certainly there's been a lot of coverage about the jockeying, about who's in second, who's in third, and we're going to spend time on that. But there has been this sort of overarching thought throughout that there really wasn't a primary here. Trump's up huge. Like, that's going to be our takeaway tonight, no matter who finishes second, no matter, whether DeSantis can move on to New Hampshire or South Carolina or not. It's really that Trump won, and Trump's probably going to win big. And I know there's some turnout concerns because of the weather, but just do you see anything other than that being the takeaway tonight? Is Trump in a rout?
He's going to win big without even having to do real campaigning. And this is a primary unlike we've ever seen. He didn't do any debates. He's barely showed up in Iowa, where Ron DeSantis has basically lived for a few months. And he's going to smoke him in the caucus. So, yeah, you talk usually about who comes in second, maybe who comes in third out of Iowa. That's if it's close. This is probably not going to be anywhere near close. And so at this point, you have to ask the question to certainly a Ron DeSantis, but even a Nikki Haley, if she looks good in New Hampshire, what is your plausible case for winning the nomination coming out of here? If you're losing by 30 points in Iowa, and you're going into Nevada and South Carolina, where polling shows you're doing even worse there, how do you continue asking donors for money? How do you look at this party and think what you represent is actually what they're looking for? Trump won without even having to really do much of anything.
So let's talk about the very, very narrow path that Nikki Haley might have, because I think she is the one candidate who has at least a little bit of momentum and at least a plausible plausible, if unlikely, scenario. And that would be she did finish a second tonight, a distant second, but headed DeSantis. DeSantis' campaign more or less goes away after that. She then, with the help of Chris Christie dropping out, maybe she wins New Hampshire and then has the buzz and the talk, like the consolidation of the Never Trump forces surround Haley with a few weeks before South Carolina. But isn't the problem with that plan what you just said, that though Haley, South Carolina's her home state, she's distant in the polls behind Trump there?
Yeah, I mean, she obviously represented there, but it's Trump country. It is the Deep South. It is where Trump's base of support is. So the idea that she could turn that around, I don't really see that as plausible. I mean, campaigns end when you run out of money, usually, and I just don't know how she turns to people and makes a case that she is now going to flip this state. Or any other state, frankly. I mean, Donald Trump has basically a national operation without having to really do much of anything. These people have invested so much time and effort in these early states. The idea that they can build out an operation from here. We remember when Joe Biden was able to turn around his fortunes in South Carolina. That's when the whole party, the Democratic Party, turned and the establishment came around and rallied to his base. Jim Clyburn bailed him out. There's no establishment base to bail out Nikki Haley. There's no savior who can endorse her at this point and turn things around for her. So there are surprises that happen. There are upsets that happen, but we would be talking about an upset that we have never seen, and there really just is no structure in place to create one.